In yesterday's video on the 68 Super Reverb, I misspoke about something very important. Now, when I do these videos, sometimes I misspeak because I'm thinking about the amp, I'm thinking about the technical stuff, I'm thinking about how to explain the technical stuff, I'm thinking about the focus, the lighting, etc., etc. I'm a one-man show. I'm not doing these with a script and a whole bunch of cameras. I'm just documenting what I find in these amps as I do the work on them. And it's okay if I occasionally misspeak and call a resistor a capacitor or whatever. And I usually correct myself midstream, But yesterday I misspoke in such a way that I really need to go back and correct myself. I said that on this amp, with the polarity switch in the orientation where I have 119 volts on the chassis, AC potential, that I only measured 300 milliamps of current from chassis to ground, and that it would not kill you. I misspoke terribly. 300 milliamps will kill you. I actually measured 300 microamps, which is much lower. And so I'm going to redo this on camera. So right now I have the polarity switch to the left, and I'm measuring AC with the amp plugged into the wall, but not powered on, and I have 0.264 volts AC potential. I flip the polarity switch to the right. I have 121 volts AC potential from chassis to ground. Now let me show you what's interesting about this in general from this era of amplifier. If I unplug this from the wall, you'll notice, let's see if it's focusing, that the polarity, the plug itself, the two prongs are the same width. So unlike a modern three conductor where the neutral is larger than the hot, and it can only go into the outlet one way, this can go into the outlet either way. So the way I had it plugged in the first time, the ground switch on the right was 119 volts. Let's see if that's the case when I plug it in randomly again. Okay. All right, I've plugged it back into the wall, into the outlet. And now with the ground switch to the right, I measure 2 volts AC. If I flip the ground switch to the left, back to almost 119 volts AC potential. It's varying as the wall voltage has just spiked up to 123 here at Memphis. So this is now the ground position on the left, which used to be the safe one. That's going to vary every time you plug one of these amps into the wall because it's random chance, 50-50, whether you get the hot and neutral going to where they're supposed to be. That's why Fender had this polarity switch originally, because your wall outlets had holes of the same size. There was no ground, there was no hot and neutral different size for the plug. So you would just set it to whichever one buzzed the least. And the one which buzzed the least was the one that was safe. Safer if that cap doesn't fail. So now with the ground switch to the right, I've got 2.12 volts AC potential. This is with the amp plugged in but powered off. Now with the ground switch to the left, I've got 120 volts AC potential voltage from chassis to ground. So now I'm going to measure how much current there is. We're going to start with the ground switch to the right, where there is very low AC potential voltage. And with the ground switch to the right, we are measuring 37 microamps AC voltage. If I flip the ground switch to the left, which will put 122 volts on the chassis right now, oh look, that goes up to 2060, let's call it, microamps. If I go to the milliamp setting, that's going to read as, 2 milliamps. Now 2 milliamps you will not feel, that is not dangerous. But what is of concern is that when I did the same test yesterday, instead of measuring 2 milliamps, I measured 0.3 milliamps, 300 microamps. So what changed between yesterday and today? My hypothesis on that is that this amp, after speaking to the owner yesterday, the owner of this amp has not played this or even plugged it in years. He primarily plays acoustic guitar. This amp has not been plugged in or had any voltage on it. And after I did the initial video yesterday, and I cleaned all the tube sockets and I put everything back, I biased the amp because it was very cold, and then I let it run for several hours to see if anything changed in its performance as everything got hot. And I suspect that it was that several hours of actually using the amp which changed the behavior of that ground cap. Now, that's just a hypothesis. I've not tested that. I'm hoping that the owner will let me make changes to this amp so that it will have a grounded power cable, and then this issue will disappear. It'll be moot. But yesterday, the first time this amp had been powered on in years, I measured 300 microamps from chassis to ground, AC, and today I'm measuring 2,000 microamps, 2 milliamps. If I change this to the full amp setting, it doesn't even register. So 2 milliamps will not kill you. That will just barely light up an LED if it were in series. But again, you're trusting an old film cap to limit that leakage, to limit the current to 2 milliamps, because they drift, and they can drift and fail quickly. Once the process begins, it accelerates. So I wanted to point out that I misspoke yesterday in a horrible way, which could lead people to measure 300 milliamps and think that they're safe. They are not. But I misspoke, but I did not mismeasure, and I was not making things up. So I hope that everyone understands what I'm saying. If you have any questions, please ask, because these things are very dangerous. And people take it for granted that, hey, I plugged into it last week, it was safe. Today is not last week.